Okay, hi Ollie,
Hi, Marcos. Good
and
to see
hello.
you.
Likewise, and hello everyone. So we're continuing our exciting romp through the signs with Saturn and the Sun. Uh, we're just going to today. We've done the Saturn in the cardinal signs. We've done Saturn in the fixed signs. So now it's the turn of Saturn in the mutable signs. And I thought we might start with Saturn in Pisces, just because that's where Saturn is now. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, we've said this the last few videos. Please do check out our video on Sun Saturn aspects, because that will be relevant to all of these videos and to this as well. And we do talk about specific remedies for Sun Saturn aspects in that. Um, so we're really doing these videos from the point of view of people who may not know much astrology, who might be beginners to astrology, but who do know their sun sign. So if for this video, if you are a sun sign Pisces or Gemini or Virgo or Sagittarius, then what we'll be talking about is the kinds of things sort of medically and psychologically that might happen when Saturn goes through those signs, through any of those signs. So, all right, shall we start with Pisces and just before do you want to start with Pisces or shall I? I mean, it's you should start with it, Ollie, because you're familiar with this placement.
I'll
So
start. I'll start with it. I've got a pattern. Yes. So, Saturn in Pisces. So, this would be when. So basically, this will affect people with obviously a Sun in Pisces, but also the Sun in the opposite sign to Pisces, which is, of course,
yeah, I know, brain fart, Virgo.
the one opposite it, which is Virgo. Yes. Um, so the fix for Virgo would be in opposition, and also it would affect people if it's in Sagittarius and also in um, God, my brain's all up the creek
Well,
today.
I've just written them down here, Ollie. So I have
All
a
right,
handy crib sheet. So it'd be Gemini or Sag. So
Gemini or Sagittarius. So, and then you get a square, and obviously, depending on which of those your sun is, you'll get various different effects. But effectively, if you're looking at particularly if your sun is going to be in Pisces, I mean, Pisces is classically the feet and the fishy feet. So we might be looking at some like Saturnian effects on the feet. Be more chronic stuff, bunions, corns, bone stuff in feet again with Saturn, etc.
or fungal
Or
infections like
fungal
fungal
infection.
nail stuff, things like that.
Saturn rules those things in the dark, doesn't it? And
Mm,
mushrooms and stuff. Yes.
yes,
So
exactly. Exactly.
definitely
Or
feel
even
that.
even things like you could get with Saturn there, because it rules blockages and restrictions, and Pisces is a watery sign. You could get things like edema, like swelling in the feet.
Yeah, well, that would
Um,
be very because it definitely yeah, and in other places, of course. But
mm.
um, what other horrible feat thing can happen? But yes, I mean, the athlete's foot, blah blah. We could go on, couldn't
No,
we?
yeah, but there's very numbness in the feet, like Saturn rules numbness. So
A
you could have
nice
things
one,
like peripheral
yes.
neuropathy. Um,
Neuropathies, and so that's all your diabetes stuff, etc.,
yep,
etc., would be a classic one to happen there, wouldn't it?
yep,
So yeah. And generally, we're going to see in Pisces the body's fluids as well. So, again, depending on the specifics, you might get edemas in various different places, etc. Problems
yeah,
with the lymphatic system and knock-on effects on the immune system would be something to look out for, I would imagine, as well.
yeah. I spoke interestingly. I spoke with I mean, absolutely to all of that, Ollie, and I spoke to a lady today who natally has Saturn rising in Pisces. So as a Pisces rising, this would be a Saturn return, and she was complaining of chronic catarrh and rhinitis. So, and that makes sense because Pisces is a watery, phlegmy sign. Saturn,
Yes.
as you were saying, causes that retention of water, sort of bogginess, as it does in all the
Yeah.
watery
Yeah.
signs. And rising, obviously, Saturn, we've been talking about Saturn in the sign that Pisces represents anatomically the feet, that's the body parts, the lower bit of the body. But if it's rising in your chart, then the rising bit of your chart is your head. So
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of this is going to be very modified by the context of the astrology, as always. So, yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, yes. But that, I think that seems from my experience. I also have a Saturn rising, but a bit further
Yes.
away from that. Yes, I can attest to that. Um, yeah, I mean, and there'd probably be, because Pisces is a very sensitive sign as well, emotionally, etc. Classically, we could look out for things like depression and mood problems, etc., etc. I would
Yeah.
imagine, anything with that, so of that heaviness type sort of mood issues.
Yes, that's very true. I remember it was actually Kurt Cobain's Saturn, I think, Saturn in
Was
Pisces.
he? Right.
Yeah, he was a Saturn in he was Virgo rising actually. But he had Saturn in Pisces conjunct Venus in Pisces on his descendants. I remember that in
Interesting.
his chart.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not to say that everyone with Saturn in Pisces is going to be depressive, but it does have that sensitivity to it, as you say, Ollie.
Yes.
That's exactly correct. Um, Interesting, but I'm saying it's exactly correct, not just because that was exactly the word that the lady I spoke with today used. She said,
Oh,
I'm
really?
very sensitive. And I was like,
Right.
okay, yeah, makes sense. With it, Saturn causes retention. So there's this interesting paradox with Saturn in the water signs where Saturn always puts up a mask, a guard, a front. So like Saturn in Leo appears like it doesn't care about the reputation or anything like that, but
Right.
really does. Saturn in the water signs appears like they don't care, but actually they're really sensitive. There's a real sensitivity to
Yes.
emotional stuff. So it's Saturn is like that. It's sort of it has this sort of anesthetized facade, a poker face, but it very much has the attributes of the sign in which it's placed as well. Um, in terms of sun in Pisces, Ollie, I mean, so people who are born with the sun in Pisces, I guess, we haven't, so we do Saunders's system. So
Oh,
this
yes,
is,
yes, yes, yes.
yeah. So where would that be? So that would be Saturn traditionally rules Capricorn and Aquarius.
Yes.
So Saturn Pisces is the third sign from Capricorn and the second sign
Second.
from
So
Aquarius.
you're
So
talking about, yeah, the
yeah, so that would
equivalent of
make it analogous to Gemini
and
and to
Taurus.
Taurus, the third and second sign of the
Yes.
zodiac. So there may be, while Saturn goes through Pisces, some people may be experiencing, some people will, of course, be experiencing, because, there's the whole world, but some people may be experiencing, particularly if Saturn is picking on something in their chart, problems with the arms, shoulders, and hands, the whole shoulder girdle, which is the Pisces bit, or the neck and the throat, which is the Taurus bit.
Yes.
And those problems might be more Saturnine in nature, so chronic, affecting the joints, affecting the skin, cold, stiffness, blockages, those sorts of things. And they'd be more likely to occur perhaps in those with who are natally Sun in Pisces, or
Yes,
I think
because I mean, I'm just trying to see how happy is Saturn in Pisces?
Yeah, good. That's a very good question. Not very for
Oh,
most of it, I
very. I
think.
don't. I mean, for most of it, there's no real dignity there, is there?
Well, it has the sliver of dignity in the first 10 degrees
Right.
where it's in
Okay.
its traditionally in its face. So it has um it's sort of like a market trader peddling junk that nobody's really buying but just selling enough to keep a roof over its head. That's the kind of level
Right.
of
That sounds
dignity
just like
in
my Saturn. Yeah. So.
Shut up! No way. That's kind of like that's the Saturn in the first decan. So traditionally, I mean, we won't go into the dignities. That's for
No,
another
but it's
podcast.
not a
But
very. But it is. I mean, it's cold and dry Saturn, and Pisces is classically cold and wet. So it's not as unhappy as it would be in some signs, sort of thing.
no, because it shares that
But
common
actually,
coldness, I guess. But
but that's
yeah,
going to increase the coldness of it, though, isn't it?
yes,
So it's not
definitely.
necessarily very good for the person.
No, and the nature of the signs is actually very different. So they share that common active quality of cold, as it was traditionally
Yes.
called. There was heat and cold with the so-called active qualities in ancient Greek philosophy, Aristotelian physics. But they're very different. Like Pisces traditionally was ruled by Jupiter and the exaltation of Venus. So it's a
Right.
sign that is very much of the nature of both the benefics. And Saturn,
Yes.
of course, is the chief of the malefics. So like sort
Yes.
of in that sign, I think Saturn is challenged to more sympathy and kindness than it really feels it's comfortable giving, because Saturn is the
Right.
ultimate boundaries planet. Saturn
Yes.
is
Yeah.
super harsh. So I think it's just like that's where the sensitivity comes from. This feeling of potentially having one's boundaries overwhelmed by excess empathy. It's
Yes.
sort of like, and there's almost an excess of empathy and a fear of empathy and a fear of being overwhelmed by empathy. And so what we're seeing in the world now, all this, all the people losing their minds about refugees and stuff like that. I mean, that's always a perennial issue, but it's really politically coming to a head on all sorts of fronts in many unpleasant ways. And part of that, I think, is the Saturn in Pisces thing, where you've got this duality between the heaviness of this issue, meaning we need more sympathy and empathy, but also Saturn causes a starvation of that. It's almost like,
Yeah. Yeah.
do you know what I mean? It's because it's like such a heavy thing that people like will just anesthetize that part of themselves because it's
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
painful. So
It's,
but yeah, it's an
yeah.
interesting one. It's a very I think I find it a very interesting position for Saturn. I think probably the I mean, we're getting a bit psychological here, but it is interesting. It's just like, I think one of the, I mean, what you've got this Saturn, Ollie. So what
I
do you
do.
think are its, I mean, it's sometimes actually more difficult analyzing a planet from the inside, but what do you think
I
are its, some
find
of
it
its,
difficult, particularly as it is actually in my first house, but
yeah,
it's not in the ascendant sign
no,
because so I find it very difficult to step outside myself and look at its actions in my life.
yes,
But I find it does lead to certain what's the word? Things that are more obvious to me now as one gets older, one sees these things. But certainly illogical fears and things like that, which I think is very
right.
Saturn in Pisces, that you don't really
Yes.
want to look at, sort of thing. You know they're there, but it's like, oh, let's not go there. It's a bit scary, sort of thing.
That's interesting. I think that's true of Saturn in a more generic way of Saturn in any of the water signs. Actually,
Right.
there's sort of like this. There's almost likely a phobia-prone element to them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or just these irrational emotional fears. I mean,
Irrational, emotional. There's a lot of them are kind of existential sort of thing, you know.
oh, interesting.
And you know, and it's like the people now getting so upset about, you know, all sorts of politics on all sides of political trends, but getting like kind of like explosively cross about them, sort of thing, as though, you
Mhm.
know, barriers cannot be crossed, and that's if this is challenged in any way, my whole self personality is going to break down, sort of thing. And you
Oh,
see
that's
all
interesting.
sorts of people, and that seems to be this strange Saturnian Saturn trying to hold itself together under diffusion of Pisces.
Yes, and that's a great word, diffusion. It's a very diffuse sign, isn't it? It sort of tends to, all of these mutable signs we'll be talking about today, they all mutable is because they're changing from one season to another. But also they're the traditional names for these signs were bicorporeal, meaning two-bodied, like two fishes, two twins. The centaur, I don't know where Virgo's double-bodied, but maybe she's got a twin as well. I don't know, but anyway, they're all supposed to be at least two-bodied and to be multiple. So this diffusion with Pisces, it's like the shoal of fish. It's one body made of thousands of
Yeah,
little things. So it's Pisces is emotionally like that. It's sort of like the awareness that emotions, while they may be felt as a single thing, are many different things. So this is where
absolutely.
Pisces can be almost universally sympathetic to a fault, because it can sort of like feel all, oh, I can see it, I feel that, I feel that, I feel that, I feel that. It's like all the different feelings. So I don't know, in terms of like bringing it back to just Saturn in Pisces, I guess we talked a bit about some of the physical things that might show up. In terms of the sun signs, which might find it the hardest, I think Saturn doesn't really enjoy any of the mutable signs
No.
particularly. I suppose it would be traditionally said to be on average strongest in Gemini, because Saturn rules the triplicity of the
Right,
air
yeah,
signs
precisely,
during the
yes. Got a
day
little bit of
only.
dignity there, yes.
So
Yeah.
for people who are born during the day, like literally when the sun was above the horizon, then Saturn in Gemini would be the strongest, and we'll talk about that next. But so Saturn in Pisces, I'm thinking Pisces is the 10th sign from Gemini, right? So
Yes.
so for a
According to
Gemini
him.
sun, I think they might find it quite challenging because Saturn's in an overcoming position. Pisces will probably find it the most challenging. People who have the sun in Pisces.
I think so, yeah.
Virgo will also find it very challenging, and so will Sag. But probably if we were to do a little hierarchy, I might go. It's a tricky one. This, but in general, I might go probably the one with the conjunction here. Pisces might feel it the most strongly. Then Virgo because it's the opposition. Then Gemini because it's in the 10th and overcoming position from Gemini, and then finally Sag. And as usual, people who are born at night will feel these Saturn transits much more strongly. And this current one, by the way, we've got the dates here. So this current Saturn in Pisces, it began in 7th of March 2023, and it will finally end on the 24th of May 2025. And I'm not looking forward to that because for me, this is almost a little holiday because Saturn in the mutable signs is the only time when Saturn isn't beating stuff up in my chart. So, I mean, it's beating up my Jupiter slightly, but Jupiter can take it. So it's okay. So, all right, should we move on to...
Let's move on to Gemini.
Yes. Okay, I'll start and then we'll swap. So Saturn in Gemini, like I said, it's maybe on average a bit stronger than Saturn in Pisces. Not massively stronger, but if you're born during the day, it has a little bit more dignity traditionally, a little bit more power, a little bit better behaved. Gemini traditionally rules the arms, shoulders, and hands anatomically, and like all the air signs, it might be said to have something to do with the circulation in general. And it could also be said to, because of its Mercury rulership, modern astrologers, and I think we'd agree, say it has something to do with the nervous system too.
I would go. And what about the bronchial tubes and things as well? Would you
good point. Yes, because some astrologers, I put the bulk of the lungs under Cancer actually because of the Jupiter rulership, but I would agree with that in that Mercury, because Mercury rules all the fine channels like nerves.
Right.
So maybe, and because this bit, the shoulders, you've got the apices of the lungs under here, just under the clavicles. Yeah. So I do think Gemini does share some lung rulership.
Some bit of lung things.
Just topographically, just because it's sitting above Cancer. But I think the bulk of the lungs is probably under Cancer.
Agreed.
Yeah, okay. So, but yeah, no, that's a good point. And I do think there is definitely some rulership there because you often do see with Saturn and Gemini that there may be some breathing issues like asthma and that kind of stuff. But generally Saturn in Gemini, so we might have problems with stiffness or musculoskeletal issues in the arms, shoulders and hands, circulatory issues, again the usual cavalcade of Saturn related things like blockages, numbness, stiffness, you could again peripheral neuropathy, but this time in the hands, so that sort of stuff. But also Saturn in Gemini, we're looking at, it's the 5th sign from Aquarius and the 6th sign from Capricorn.
So Leo and Virgo-y things,
Yeah, so we're looking at, so the 5th sign might be related to Leo and the 6th sign might be related to Virgo. So Saturn in Gemini bizarrely might also indicate issues with the heart or ribs or chest. And also the small intestine, spleen, or gallbladder. And Saturn being Saturn, we could be looking at stones and stiffness or coldness or whatever, those sorts of Saturn-y things.
I mean, again, throwing this out here because it's but as Gemini is an air sign, and you get sort of chronic airy conditions in the intestines, a sort of thing, sort of terrible bloating or whatever.
Farting and bloating and wind.
I'm just because obviously that's a sort of chronic Saturnian condition, but then it's in Gemini sort of thing. I'm just trying to mix and match.
It's Saturnian, but you're right, Ollie. It's also Mercurial because while Saturn generally rules the retentive faculty, I think wind, like burping, both in the literal sense like burping and farting, but also in the mercurial sense of the nerves, that wind in the nerves, like ticks and twitches and essential tremor. All of that was mercurial traditionally.
And a lot of those herbs that treat that are mercurial as well, aren't they?
Yeah, most of the carminatives, well, not most, but a great number of the carminatives are mercurial. And then you think of a mercurial plant like valerian, which is both bloating and
Yes,
nervous.
and think, you know, your fennels and stuff like that, and all the
Lavender, another good one.
yeah,
So yeah, yes, absolutely. So, and often you sometimes get a twofer with the mercurials, because they do the
exactly,
nervous and the you know, the wind and bloating. So no, that's a good point, because Saturn in Gemini could also exacerbate sort of chronic nervous conditions,
yes.
particularly age-related conditions. Because remember, Saturn is the author of chronic
Oh, interesting. Yes,
stuff.
yes.
So you know, if there's a degenerative condition that might be affecting motility, for example, maybe that might
Well, I
might be
suppose a classic Gemini would be something like Parkinson's, which are terrible, you know, the shakes of the hands,
potentially.
etc. You
Yes,
know, that would be quite a good example. But
that's a really good example, actually, Ollie. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. So yeah, I mean, because even though we know that the seat of Parkinson's disease is in the brain, in the substantia nigra, in
mm,
the Aries bit, as I say, the animal spirits, traditionally the bits which
it's just,
motivate
yeah,
you are Mercury
exactly.
ruled. So yeah, that's fascinating. So I mean, then as I say, there's not much to choose between which of the signs will like or dislike this transit. Again, Saturn in Gemini, probably your Geminis won't like it at all, but with the slight caveat of some of those born during the day
Yeah, as you
may
said, yeah.
find that, as we talked about to a much greater extent with people like yourself with the sun in Aquarius or sun in Libras in the previous videos, they will often find that while the transit of Saturn is always quite, you know, it brings some difficulties, it's a leveling up experience. That the daytime sun in Gemini people might find they're somewhat leveled up a little bit, you know, as a result of the transit. Not massively, not as much as an Aquarius or a Libra might be, but there might be some
Yeah,
benefits,
yeah, for sure.
depending where the sun is in their chart, of course. So there's that. So Gemini's mixed bag. What is Gemini the 10th? Gemini's the 10th from Virgo. So your Virgos probably won't like it at all.
No,
Your Sagittarius definitely won't like it, and your Pisces probably won't like it either. So in
no,
terms of
pretty
the
bad,
triage
bad
here,
lot. Yeah.
yeah, I'd probably go your sun, your Saturn in Gemini, all things being equal. Your Sagittarius will resent it the most. Sun in Sag, potentially, then possibly Virgos, then maybe Geminis, then maybe Pisces. And I'm just putting Gemini further down the list there, because even though a conjunction is the strongest of those transits, Gemini potentially can actually get some juice out of Saturn in a
Yeah,
good way. I think. I don't know.
yeah.
Any? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think particularly daytime stuff, chart and stuff like that. I think, yeah, it's
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm talking in massive generalities here, because a
well,
lot of
of
these
course,
things can be
yeah.
changed significantly by context and by the rest of the chart and all the rest of it. Do you want to do Virgo?
Yeah,
Or
why not? I mean,
yeah,
Virgo again is a digestive system, so it's the guts, and you're going to see everything around the guts. So the that heaviness of Saturn coming, you know, constipation, blockages, problems. It's also gallbladder stuff, so we might get gallstones as well. Would be a classic Saturnian condition in Virgo, wouldn't it?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and yeah, anything really. I mean, so it's interesting because with Saturn, it's not going to be these very inflammatory things like, you know,
No.
inflammatory bowel disease or Crohn's or something like that. Well, not in their inflammatory state anyway. So, which is much more a Martian thing. So it's going to be deadening stuff that, you know, the lack of gut motility, lack of movement.
Yeah, I mean, with the one thing we haven't mentioned, because we don't want to freak everyone out primarily, is Saturn was also one of the traditional rulers of Cancer.
True.
So you know, that's the one of the darker possibilities. And of course, they say 1 in 3 of us will get some form of it in our
Right.
lifetimes.
Yeah.
Now, woohoo, always good to have something to look forward to, isn't it? But I think that the Saturn in all these signs, potentially it could be something like that, because of the Saturn signature of age-related diseases, things that sort of like cause a decline in the immune function, and I think things which also, what was the other thing, retention of wastes and stuff like that. All of these are sort
Yes.
of related to,
Yeah.
and chronic
Yeah.
stress as well, all
Well,
of
yeah.
which are risk factors for cancer development. So
Yes.
there's something like that. So, you know, Saturn in Virgo, as you were saying, Ollie, it could be those sort of obstructions or slowing down or impediments in the digestive apparatus,
And
gallstones,
I mean,
whatever.
the other thing with this one, of course, is with all the recent research going into gut health and depression and mental health, etc. Of
SIBO,
course,
maybe. Oh,
well, no, this thing that, like, gut health has been shown to have this enormous effect on getting depression or not, which is a very
yes.
Saturnian
Well,
disease.
well, but that's fascinating though, from on several levels, because the old name for hypochondriac melancholy.
Right, yes.
So the
Yeah.
melancholy humor. This is we're getting geeking out on medieval doctoring here, folks. But like the melancholy humor was stored in the spleen in
Right.
in the tradition. It was thought to be stored in the spleen, and the melancholy humor had lots of physical functions, like it helped you retain stuff from food that your body needed, but it also was linked to an excess could be linked to melancholy, which is a state of potentially depression, over rumination, lots of mental health
Yeah.
issues. And that was thought to be seated literally in the spleen, in the left hypochondrium, in the region of the body ruled by Virgo. And there's a
Right.
fascinating, there's both an astrological tangent and a physiological tangent from this. The physiological tangent being the whole, as you were talking about, the link between the microbiome and mental health, and the whole thing about a condition like SIBO, which would
That's it.
be
Yeah.
small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that might have a knock-on effect on both physical and mental health. But then you've also got so from the functional perspective, you've got things like the bile, which is produced from the gallbladder in that
Right.
Virgo region, and the pancreatic enzymes, all of which the normal regular release of these things is essential for maintaining a normal microbial balance in the small intestine. So Saturn going through this sign could be indicating blockages or limitations or slowing down of release of any of those things. And then the astrological tangent was just the anticia between Virgo and Aries,
Yeah.
which is this hidden link between the
That's
head
right.
and the
Yes.
small
Yes.
intestine, which one
Oh,
sees
that's
often
nice.
in biliary
That's nice.
migraines, for
Yes.
example, stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? So no, that's a great point, Ollie. I really like that. I mean, in terms of the we've also got there's the connection between the microbiome. We're also mainly look at the colon, which is a Scorpio ruled region,
True. Yeah.
and Aries, which is where the brain, and that they might be the link there is they might be jointly ruled by Mars, perhaps. There's a joint Mars rulership traditionally.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, which is interesting. So yeah, I mean that would require a bit of further thought. But anyway, yes. All right. So
Okay.
Saturn, yeah.
Saturn. Then, so move on to Sagittarius.
Oh, I think so, but let's just briefly mention, because we talked a bit about the psychology of Saturn in Pisces, just Saturn in Gemini and Virgo, the two Mercury ruled signs, although very different. I guess Saturn in Gemini might be, I don't know, what would that, and versus Saturn in Virgo. I know Saturn in Virgo is easier for me to compute, if you like, to use a slightly Virgo-y word, but it's because it's sort of the feeling that one can't be precise enough, or that one isn't being exacting enough, or that there isn't one can't be, that one hasn't done enough of one's work.
Right.
It's sort of Saturn always produces, particularly with the sun, if you have the sun in these signs, the imposter syndrome that we've talked about a lot with Saturn. So Saturn in Virgo, the root of the imposter syndrome can often be that sort of feeling that I've not done enough.
About Gemini might be something like in the kind of thinking about things. Thoughts are so interesting, jumping from one thing to another, that for Geminis, that psychological sort of thing might be more that like not getting their thoughts together sort of thing, finding them thoughts limited.
Yes.
I can't find the right book almost. It's like, where do I go from here?
Yes, Saturn is, I always think of Saturn as that, like Professor Snape, in the Harry Potter films, the one who walks behind you and whacks you over the head with the book, so I think that's perfect, because it is like that. Saturn coming into the sign can be literally like this censorious presence coming in and saying, you're not doing this well enough at all. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's great, actually. the sort of like, you get it together, do your, learn what you should, communicate better, articulate better,
Yeah.
put your thoughts, that sort of thing. Interesting. All right. And then Saturn in Sag.
Yes.
By the way, we're just looking forward. Saturn in Gemini was June 2030 to July 2032. And Virgo, the next one will be July 2037 to September 2039. So that's we went way into the future with that one. But then Saturn in Sag, we decided just to go a bit into the past for this one. So the last time Saturn was in Sag was 2014 to 2017, so relatively recent.
So if you've got your sun sign in there, or any of the other ones on the three opposite or corner ones, you can have a little think to see, did any of this happen to me, sort of thing.
Yes. So exactly. So if anyone who's a sun in Pisces or Gemini or Virgo or Sag is in this slice of time that we're in now, as we're recording this, between March 2023 and May 2025, at some point in this time, Saturn will be on your sun.
Absolutely.
And certainly if you're a Pisces, for the whole of this time, you'll have some of that sun Saturn.
I can't remember if you mentioned this in the last couple of episodes, Mark. I'm going to ask you again, for anyone who...
Okay.
Sort of, obviously, as the conjunction or the square or the opposition gets nearer, you're going to feel the effects more. But when do you think you'd first start feeling them? What's the realistic?
Yeah, yes, that's it. I like that question. I mean, we did talk about it in the Sun Saturn episode. My feeling is that the minute Saturn enters the sign, particularly if your sun or the planet is in that sign, like in the same sign, it's like being in the same room as the planet or in the same building. Somebody's come into the building. You've heard the doorbell. So this ominous presence, like Freddy Krueger is in the house. He's in the house. So he might not be like sitting on your bed, but he's in the house. So Saturn can, obviously the worst Saturn is Freddy Krueger. Maybe the best is like Professor Snape after you've realized that he's not as bad as you thought he was, but just that kind of vibe. So this slightly ominous presence has entered the home. So yes, it may not be breathing down your neck, but you're aware that it's there. So I think for the whole time period you're aware, but then we did talk about this briefly. There are sort of periods with the sun where Saturn transiting through a sign, it'll be maybe 2 or 3 months, maybe a bit less sometimes, where Saturn, sometimes a month only, depending where your sun is. It's a bit of a potluck because sometimes Saturn zips past somebody's sun just once. Zips, I mean, it's there over it for a month or so, but it doesn't go back. But sometimes Saturn will retrograde back over the position of the sun, and if that happens, you might have a sun Saturn for a month or so, and then it moves away, and then 3 months later you might have another one, and then a couple of months after that you might have another one. So but for the whole time it's in the sign. So currently it'll be the Pisces people who are feeling that, and they probably will have noticed something from like March 2023, and that vibe will be going on to some degree or other until May 2025. So if there's Pisces who are during that time doing a bunch of exams, or who are feeling like their life, they have a few more obstacles and tests to overcome, that's kind of the vibe. But then there might only be a few months within that time where it's really concentrated.
And then and May 25 we go back to the cardinal signs.
Yes, so, we go back to Aries, which I'm wildly excited about, as I've said. So being an Aries. So but I mean for the other signs, like where Saturn isn't in, so at the moment Saturn isn't in Gemini, Virgo, Sag, I think by aspect it's a bit more precise. Because Saturn isn't in the same house.
So that's what I was getting at. So by aspect, we're looking at about 3 degrees each side.
So we're looking at the transits of Saturn was probably, if it's just one, it'll be a month or so, for 2 or 3 degrees either side. But as I say, if Saturn then goes retrograde, it might hit that sun for, it might be 2 or 3 passes. It's either 1 or 3 usually passes of the sun. You either get the whoop, or it's like three bites of that sour cherry that no one wants to eat. And then and the last one we've got.
Let's swiftly move on to Sagittarius. 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 Well, classically, that's the hips, thighs, and all that area. I mean, the sciatic nerve, I think we could put under there as well, which obviously are very, very vital. And some people would put the liver under there now because of the Jupiter rulership. Would you like that or not
No,
particularly? No. Okay.
not me, not personally. I mean, I get why, because the Jupiter rulership, but just
I've heard
topographically, unless your
no,
liver's in your pelvis, then
no. I
no.
mean, it's like putting the nerves under, some people's. I don't know.
Yes. No,
Maybe they're
I
trying to
get it
share out
because of
stuff.
the rulership. But I mean, at least with Gemini, there's a little bit. There are some
Yeah, that's
cervical
true.
outflows to the
True.
upper
Okay.
upper limbs, which
Yeah, but there's no. Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
we'll
um,
debate this later.
let's. So you're looking for, well, sciatica would be a classic one, wouldn't it? For
Yeah.
that sort of pain, nerve pain coming down in that area, etc. Low. Um, it's difficult because where would you put the where would you end and would you give them Sagittarius any of the spine at all?
Yeah, I would. I'd give it just the sacral spine, as you
You would
say.
give
And
it the
so,
sacral
so the
spine,
lumbar spine I'd give mostly to Libra, and then the sacrum and so the sacrum, coccyx, pelvis,
right?
I would give to. So, yeah, but you are right. This, I mean, I don't think these things have hard boundaries. I don't think it's like,
No,
Libra right down to L5 and then S1 it's Sagittarius. I think there is a bit of an overlap there. So, like, you could have sciatic, which sciatica is, I think it's a lumbar vertebra. I think it's L4, L5. I can't remember, but it's a lumbar
right.
vertebral
Well, it could go down
nerve
into
compression,
thigh
I think.
classically, can't it? The pain again. I mean,
Yeah.
and again, we've got this crossover between where the symbolic and the actual sort of thing, because
Yes.
as you were talking earlier about, this is felt, this starts in the brain, but it's felt in the peripheral nervous system.
Yeah.
Um, and as far as astrology is concerned, they're both right symbolically, sort of thing.
Yes. I mean, so well, because we're talking about divination here, folks. I don't. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, but I personally don't think, there's some medical astrologers who've attempted to get it down to a really forensic, scientifically
Oh
accurate
God,
thing,
I've
like where
seen
this.
those list of degrees.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. This degree of this sign is this gland, and I'm just like, this isn't medical science. This is divination. So you're like literally like, it's a symbol system. It's a language. So you're kind of describing things in a more abstract way, and then you have to use your own intellect and the real world data to kind of map it. But all that, I do think that the traditional thing was Sag was the hips and pelvis, so it roughly maps onto that sacral spine,
Yeah, yeah.
coccyx, hips, and obviously sciatica. I think I'm right in saying it's L4, L5. I'd need to check that. I mean, can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's L4, L5. But it still runs through that,
It does run
that
through that.
region.
And my mother always felt it in her hip, so
Yes,
that's
and
so
it's off,
it's
exactly.
classically a hip pain.
Yeah, and
So
it radiates down, through the sort of hip region into the thigh, so
that's it.
maybe
Yeah.
down the leg. So yeah, I think definitely that, and things like more hardcore things like Cauda equina syndrome, or just you say pathologies with the hip. What else you could things like potentially? I'm guessing prolapses, not sort of womb and whatever, but like just I don't know. No, prolapses might be more Scorpio kind of thing, that with bladder and bowel and all that kind of stuff. I'm guessing that
You see, the thing is, I mean, I'm going to go on a
inguinal
limb.
hernias though would be Sag, maybe.
Inguinal hernias, brilliant. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. No, it's always one of the ones Sagittarius that throws me because
Hmm.
on the whole zodiacal Melasthesia thing, like look, some things have loads of stuff. And then some, and like, even Capricorn has the knees, but then it's got all the bones as well. So that's good.
Yeah.
And then you get to Sagittarius, it's like, oh, it's a thigh.
No, I know, but actually, there's a lot of pathologies that go on. But think about the amount of people who have osteoarthritis in the hips,
Right. Okay.
or
Okay.
any of those problems with those sacral nerve, like the
Right.
Cauda equina
Right.
syndrome. You're incontinent. You can't control it. So
Right.
there's the prox. So as we know, a lot of the signs in the trunk in terms of the zodiac man, the sort of the earth and water signs rule the squishy internal bits, and the air and earth and the fire signs rule the sort of outer bits. So it's sort of like almost like Scorpio's telescoped into Sagittarius a little bit, you know.
Yes.
So there's a big overlap, and I think a lot of the issues with the structure in oh, hang on, my computer's having issues. I think some of the problems with the structures in Sagittarius might give rise to problems in the Scorpio region. So
Right. Oh, interesting.
but just in terms of, yeah, I've seen charts with issues in Sag or the
Right.
ninth house, which are not to be confused in other domains, but in medical astrology, there's often an overlap between signs and houses. Traditionally, Sag and the ninth house had very separate sets of meanings, except they ruled the same sort of anatomical region, which is the hips and the pelvis. And problems in that region will often relate to pelvic problems in general, so they can often have effects higher up, like the gynae or bowel, or you know, that kind of thing, which are more classically thought of as Scorpio. But no, you're right, it is just it is mainly hips, pelvis, sacral, spine, but there's quite a few. So arthritis in the hips, herniation, problems with the sacral spine, which can cause all sorts of neurological problems in the lower limbs, lymph drainage outflow problems going to the lower limbs. I think I've exhausted everything off the top of my head there, but basically,
that's right. But we can always go to Saunders attributions as well, which thinking of, because they would be 11 and 12, wouldn't they?
Yes, well done. So yes, it would be, wouldn't it? So if we've got Aquarius is the first, then Sag is the 11th from that, and so we're looking at Aquarius and Pisces.
So again, we've got circulation, lymphatic stuff, maybe with, you know, a touch of sort of a bit more fire in them. I don't know. I mean, but an interesting sort of thing.
Yes, and just in terms of the anatomy, that would fit with pelvic blockages leading to lymphatic or circulatory problems. Nice, you know what I mean? The link between if you have like ipsilateral, unilateral, I don't know, claudication or lymphedema or something, then it could be an impediment. So anyway, but yeah, that's an interesting one. And again, I don't think there's much to choose between the mutable signs into which signs will dislike the transit of Saturn through Sagittarius. Most probably Sagittarius will dislike it most, followed maybe by Geminis, and then your Pisces, and finally your Virgos. Yeah, because it's the 10th. So, and just as a final word, because we're well over time, but Saturn in Sag, what any word on the sort of psychological sort of side of it? What might it kind of bring?
Yeah, my psychology is Sagittarians. I find them a complete mystery, to be honest.
I mean, it's quite funny because they're actually such a spontaneous, outgoing sign in general. I mean, they symbolize people who are very. I heard a very interesting take on it by Adam Ellenbus, who I like a lot, who talked about how, because it was in the northern hemisphere where astrology originates, it was like the philosophy of astrology was originated. Sag is the sign that's just going towards midwinter. So it's a fire sign. Yeah. But I always think of it as like the fire of a bonfire on a cold night or something like that. And his point was, it's actually Sagittarius is the sign of the darkening of the dark. It's before, it's the night in the northern hemisphere. So this is going to be the opposite in the southern hemisphere, but this is where astrology was as a symbol system was developed. So that's where this idea comes from. The Sag is the transmutation of autumn into winter.
Yes.
But it's the time of period of the year just as the nights are getting to their very longest, but just before the light starts to win again. Yes. He makes a really good point. I've not heard any other astrologer make explicitly, although it's made in the traditional texts, that the two Jupiter-ruled signs, Sag and Pisces, precede the time, again, in the northern hemisphere, just before the light starts to grow.
Right.
So they both rule signs in the winter half of the year in the north, just before the light starts to increase.
Yes.
And the two Mercury ruled signs rule the summery bit of the year but just before the light starts to decrease. So, you know,
Oh, it's a lovely piece of symmetry. I'm going to have to go and look at that now.
it's
Yes.
fascinating because if you think about Jupiter, faith, the nature of faith
Yes,
is
yes.
light in darkness. It's kind of like things will work out, things are going to get better. And the nature of Mercury is to analyze things to oblivion, to pick them apart, to fragment them, you know? So it's almost like this perverse sort of dance between sort of faith while things are falling apart, and the over reliance of humans on our own cleverness and technology just before things actually do fall apart, which I think is a historical cycle that you see empires follow all the time.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's so not to get too metaphysical about it, but the point here is that with Sag, it's an optimistic, bright fire sign, actually in its original symbolic sense, in the sort of like darkest part of the year. So it's kind of the psychology of Sagittarius is like, we're going to live despite this, we're going to do this, we're going to, and it's like the maximum faith in the face of, you know. So it shares with all the other fire signs this like it's like innate independence. But I think Saturn in there will kind of bring a sense of I don't know, what's the point, or some sort of negative cast to that sort of. So I think it can produce almost like dogmatic thinking. I don't know. I find it a very tricky one to talk about because I'm not overly familiar with Saturn in Sag myself. But
right, nor I. So I mean, I have Sagittarius on my mid-house, funnily enough. So
I think that Saturn in all the fire signs does have this tendency to make people both desire and fear going after what they want. I mean, Aries is more, you know, doing what you want. Leo, it's being important or being seen as important, and being and in Sag, it's sort of like meaning in things, finding meaning in things, doing meaningful things, having adventures. And with Saturn there, it'll just introduce some fear, some feeling like you're not doing enough, you can't do enough, and you're afraid to even do it because it's sort of like it's this sort of barrier to faith or tests of faith kind of thing in that sense.
Nice, I like that a lot. That seems to really fit.
That's a good starting point. Anyway, right, we've whiffled enough. This is very long.
Enough. Excellent. So I think we've done all the signs now, haven't we?
We have. So we'll have to think about what we come back with. I am trying to organise as a special guest at one point. So I'll talk to you about that immediately afterwards. But thank you to everyone who's stayed with us this far, and I hope you liked it. If you did like it, share it, do all the things. And hello and thank you to all our new subscribers.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone. Bye.